Hey boys and girls, this is Miss Callier, and today we're going to be talking about texture, an element of art that simply means how something feels when it is touched. If you've ever touched a marble, it might feel smooth or cold. Maybe you've touched a piece of wood that felt rough, or maybe even a piece of cloth that might feel smooth or silky. Artists use textures in their art to help tell a story, add dimension, or make it look interesting. There are two different types of textures. Actual texture, which is real texture. This would be real life texture, texture that it can be seen and felt, the way objects look in real life. Now, we can also say that alligators have a texture, animals with fur have a texture, and also fruit has a texture. Our skins have a texture. All of these things are real objects in real life. Then there is implied texture, texture that can be seen but not felt. This texture is actually not real. The artist creates the illusion of texture through manipulation of materials. So this would be the artist trying to draw or paint textures from real life to make it look real on the canvas or the paper. Here are examples of some real texture. Fur, dried cracked ground, the back of a leaf, the veins inside of the leaf, rocks, silky materials, even the texture of the skin of this reptile. Here are some implied textures. Textures, they're still looking real on the paper, but they're actually not real. They're made to look real. So this is called implied, where artists have taken their pencils or their paints and they've created the illusion of texture on their paper. Here's another example of visual texture. We can see different types of visual texture in our real world around us. Rough, rocky, wet, like water, bumpy, slicky, pointy, flaky. And then to our right, we can see how artists have tried to render those particular descriptions of textures. So over here, this would be the implied texture. Let's take a look at some textures in art. You know, artists have always used their paints or their pencils in a way to create some kind of feel to their painting or their creation. Vincent van Gogh was one of them. Vincent was known for squirting the paint directly onto the canvas and really not ever smoothing it in. If you got to see a real Van Gogh up close, you would notice that there were a lot of bumps and the paint would feel smooth but bumpy at the same time. Deborah Butterfield was known for creating her animal sculptures, horses, out of driftwood and other found objects, metal. And then Jeff Koons created his giant sculptures of his blown balloon of a dog. Then we can see how other artists have created textures such as in clay and sculpture using fur. Texture is how an object looks and feels. We use adjectives to describe its feeling. Rubbery, wrinkly, crunchy, fuzzy, hard, fluffy, sticky, bumpy. All of these words would describe what we see and how a texture looks. So let's create a work of art using texture. To start off, step one, the supplies you're going to need are foil, paper, permanent markers, watercolors, pencil, tape, brush, glue. You may not need the glue if you prefer to use the tape. So step two, getting started. First, let's take our paper and let's get our watercolors wet and let's begin to create a water background because we're going to be creating fish to put on top of this water. You can actually show brush strokes like I did to represent texture. This would be implied texture. So you want to take the foil and take your pencil and lightly draw into the foil. Don't press too hard, you might tear the foil. Foil's very fragile. So lightly draw the shape of your fish. I actually drew 3 fish on my foil. Then I took my permanent markers and I started to color the edge of the fish, starting with the darkest color on the edge and working towards the middle using my lighter color. I worked fairly quickly and I used my cotton swab to blend the permanent marker together. You can see that I kind of used the cotton ball to kind of softly blend off the edge of the fish and onto the foil, which is okay because we're going to be cutting this out. Here's an example of my finished fish. I went back and I kept reworking and smoothing where I could, knowing that I could get out of the lines because my fish was going to be cut out. Once I cut out my fish and I laid them onto my paper, I wanted to see how the arrangement was going to go. So when I figured that out, I got my cheese grater. Now, boys and girls, this is a very special situation where I feel like your parents ought to help you. So using this cheese grater, I laid my fish on top of it. But if you know anything about cheese graters, one direction does not hurt you, but the other direction does. So as the pictures show, my fingers will show you that you lay your fish on top and you start at the end of the cheese grater and you smooth towards the handle. That is the safest way to use the cheese grater, but it's going to give you a texture on your fish. As you can see, now my fish have texture on them, and I started to flip them over and use the tape because I felt like the tape was a better way to attach them to my paper than the glue. Plus, it's a lot easier and not as messy. And there you have it. I taped my fish in an interesting way onto my background, and you can see the textures through the foil. I really like my bottom fish. He's my favorite, as that cheese grater gave an interesting scale-like effect to my fish. Well, I hope you have fun creating this project and that you've learned something about texture. Look forward to seeing what you create uploaded on Flipgrid. Have a great weekend, boys and girls. See you later.